Welcome one, welcome all to Thersites Politics After Dark. Tonight, or this morning, or whenever you happen to be watching this, we will be discussing the book The Death of Politics, How to Heal Our Frayed Republic After Trump by Peter Wehner. So, I listened to this a few weeks ago. It was available on Libby. One thing I have to note about Libby, although it's supposed to be something that works within the library system to bring audiobooks to people who happen to have a library card, it does seem that despite all of the conservative hand-wringing about how our media ecosphere and all our public institutions are dominated by liberals, that when it comes to books on politics that have been put into audio form and are made available by our public institutions, the Republicans have a huge advantage. They have a lot more books available than the liberal side of things here in America. And thus, I was forced to, if I wanted to find something political to listen to while I was driving, turn to Peter Wehner. I had some relatively high hopes because I actually did like Anne Applebaum's book, and I figured if this is another thoughtful individual on the right, then it might not make for a bad reading, even though I do tend to detest people who came from the Bush administration. Lo and behold, it was basically what I expected it to be. Maybe a little bit better and smoother, but not too different. This book was written in 2019 during Trump's first term. So keep that in mind for context. Most of the really terrible things that Trump has done only started when he took office for the second time in early 2025. You can also, of course, count denying the results of 2020 as one of his greatest misdeeds as well, and that also had not happened as of yet. So up to this point, Trump has mostly just embarrassed himself and the nation. He also had a bit of a missile scare in Hawaii by that point, so he wasn't exactly a great president. He also had fallen asleep at the wheel after passing the big tax cut, and then just kind of messing around and not really doing anything. So, Trump's first administration, he was not a good president, but he was hardly catastrophic. Now, what is Wehner's perspective? Well, Wehner, much like Applebaum and most of the other conservative pundits, are very Christian. They like to cite the Bible. They like to talk about what Jesus might do, or at least what their church might tell them. The next book we'll review will be one by someone who is what I'd like to think of as a full-blown crazy person with religion. I don't think Peter Wehner's in that category, and certainly Anne Applebaum is not either. But he grew up loving Reagan. I assume he's already an adult by then, but he was probably pretty young. And then he was inspired by the rise of Reagan to enter politics. He ended up working the second Bush administration, so George W. Bush, and he served first as deputy director of speech writing from 2001 to 2. Yeah, good luck with that shit, man. Getting Bush to put together a coherent sentence. And after that, he wisely moved on to become director of strategic initiatives from 2002 to 7. And in this capacity, he was mostly reaching out to intellectuals, religious communities, and also helping Bush formulate policy and also messaging. So it's probably about the best job in the White House, to be honest, from everything that I've heard about various White House positions. So if any progressive candidates get elected and you need somebody in your cabinet to fill that role, call me. Anyhow, let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of the death of politics. So, much like Applebaum, Wehner is a pretty good writer. He's an educated fellow. He can cite Aristotle's Politics, and he does on multiple occasions, which is pretty rare. It's pretty rare that any ancient book, aside from the Bible, is cited in a modern work of politics. Normally, whether it's a progressive or conservative, they usually haven't read those things for starters, and if they have, they're not going to talk about it because that would make them a pure elitist. Wehner clearly is not running for anything, so he can cite Aristotle. That being said, the citations that he uses are not for anything interesting. It's all about just civility for the most part, or why civil war is bad. It's never anything too profound like Aristotle's thoughts on class he also, of course, doesn't talk about the ancient context of Aristotle or, really consider that Aristotle's thoughts on representative government are a little different than modern ideas because the reality on the ground for such governments is so different. Democracy in Aristotle's time was direct, whereas democracies now are representative, for starters. That being said, he does make some good general points in the course of his book. So these kind of underlying themes that he presses, I think, are things we should probably take as good ideas. For instance, we should have a shared factual reality. You shouldn't have a left-wing party with one view of reality and a right-wing party with another. There should be a shared factual basis. And then you debate as to what it means and what to do next. So I totally agree with him on that. So he does a good job of calling out Trump for what I believe is best termed right-wing postmodernism. He also talks about there being real, tangible benefits of civil discourse. And I think he's correct about that too. Not only does that prevent people from getting in trouble for speaking their opinions, but it also means that you can actually learn from other people. So for instance, I'm sure that if I were to have a conversation with Peter Wehner, I would disagree with most of what he has to say, but I also would learn some things. And that would then, of course, make me better, and hopefully I would know enough things to make him better. So I think he's right about that. It also, of course, can point out some things that you're not seeing. It could even lead to some adjustments in legislation if you have an intelligent conversation with someone with a different perspective. So that is a very real benefit. So it's not just ideas, it can also be policy. So once again, he's on the mark there. He also talks about the importance of policing one's own side. I couldn't agree with him more. You have to do that. You have to absolutely take accountability for your own leaders and replace them when they step out of line. So, for instance, we're seeing a bit of that now with Eric Swalwell more or less being driven out of the California gubernatorial contest because of some accusations that he might have engaged in rape. Now, obviously, Wehner is saying that the Republicans need to go after Trump. Again, 100% correct. We'll talk about why he's a little bit hypocritical on that count when he talks about all of the things a leader needs to be, and then he was in the administration of someone who demonstrably was not any of that stuff. Now, he also talks about something that puts him in line with a couple of liberal women I also read around the same time who talked about the need to get out and get involved in politics. And their advice was also to focus on the local stuff because local politics are a lot less corrupt. It's also something that not that many people show up for. And so you absolutely can have a pretty big impact directly if you enter local politics in your town. And so he advises that as well. And I think that's interesting that both sides actually agree that local politics is where you can make a difference. And unfortunately, that is completely correct because even though national or state politics are a lot more interesting, money in politics means that you can't really do a whole lot, even at the state level, but especially at the federal level. So the higher up you go, the less likely you are to be able to make any kind of change if you're a common person who's not backed by billions of dollars. So, not bad advice, honestly, even if it is depressing, and he doesn't go into how his party and both of the presidents he admires are responsible more than most other presidents for making things worse in that regard and for making it harder to have an impact on high-level politics. Of course, my phone had to ding as soon as I turned off the silence because it's only 11:40 at night. I never get text this late. That's okay. Now, as far as the big failing of this book, aside from a lot of the Christian stuff, which I can largely ignore most of the time, it's that he whitewashes George W. Bush by pretending that Bush is nothing like Trump. Now, at this time in 2019, Bush had done more damage to the country than Trump had in his 2 terms. Trump, of course, is crass, crude, and all that, but Trump didn't start the Iraq War or get us involved in Afghanistan. Trump also had not tried to privatize Social Security. Trump also did not campaign against gay marriage in his reelection bid. So for all this talk about how Bush was such a great guy and he was so kind and polite, he demonized a lot of Americans in order to make his way in politics. He did often do a good job of distinguishing between Islam and Islamic terrorism, I'll grant you that. But he did often talk about Americans who weren't loyal to the country. And he also said effectively anyone who's not with us is for the terrorist. So he doesn't call out people by name the way that Trump does, but he still paints anyone who opposes him as unpatriotic. And of course, as we mentioned, he also did a great deal to increase the amount of prejudice against gays. So Bush is not a thoughtful, really idealistic fellow. And while Bush was more civil than Trump and even more intellectual than Trump, as hard as that might... Well, actually, that's not hard to believe. Trump's a fucking idiot. Bush is not smart either, but Bush at least maybe had some inkling of what an intelligent person looked like. And he was willing to allow some intelligent people into his orbit occasionally between, football games or whatever. Anyway, another thing that Wehner talks about, he will bring up policies that Bush passed, and such as No Child Left Behind, and then he won't tell you, oh yeah, No Child Left Behind has been an absolute catastrophe. It's completely annihilated the American education system. Yeah, kind of a key detail. So, you might want to finish the thought when you bring it up. So, effectively, Wehner's ideal president is deliberative, thoughtful, reflective, and respectful. Can't really fault him for that. I would say that my ideal president would have all those traits as well. And even a president I didn't vote for, if they had those traits, I would probably have some respect for them. The problem is, okay, granted, those are areas where Trump is about a 0 out of 100 across the board. Bush also is not deliberative, not thoughtful, not reflective, and only respectful to members of his own party or people who being respectful to has some political benefit. Again, Bush did scapegoat people. Maybe he didn't go out and call Rosie O'Donnell a fat pig, but he also was disrespectful to certain groups within our society. So, yeah. Even if Trump takes Bush's failings and takes them to another level, that does not mean that Bush is therefore some sort of idealized leader who was recruited straight out of Plato's Republic. By the way, Wehner, read Plato as well. Because I know you've read Aristotle, but you need to read some other stuff too. Just saying. If you're citing the same book over and over, and the only two books he cites that I can recall are Aristotle's Politics and the Bible occasionally, yeah, man, you might want to expand your repertoire just a bit. I think you've been out of office for a while now, so you've had time. So, get on that. Anyway, that's all I have to say about this book. It is not a terrible book, but it's also not really worth your time. Hopefully I've told you enough about it that I've satisfied your curiosity. When we come back to do more book reviews, I'll be reviewing such things as Phil Robertson's Jesus Politics, which is a fucking nightmare, and I will also be reviewing Sammy Sage and Emily Amick's Democracy in Retrograde. So, stay tuned for those, and I will see you when I see you. But I'll try to do a few more of these book reviews in the near future, and then move on to some other things after that. So, this has been Thersites Politics After Dark. Peace out.